he wrote in that book that successful people have two key factors converging. The first key factor is potential, and the second one is practice. My mom was a blue ribbon quilter. She quilted for years, but she wasn't always a blue ribbon quilter. It took practice to learn to make the stitches so uniform and in length and distance apart and cutting the fabrics and piecing them together. I brought a few examples of Mom's quilting with me. These are some dust covers that she made me go over the pillows, and the quilts are of a similar design. This particular design is called Monkey Wrench. Here's one that she made for me. Boy, I don't know. I don't know if it's for a birthday or something. She wanted. This is called Tumbling Leaves, and it's been well used. In fact, the quilt has been washed so many times it probably needs some repair work done on it. But my mom believed that quilts were made to be used and not stored away in a closet or a cedar chest someplace. Lots of love went into them, and when she gave them to you, she expected you to cover yourself up with them at night. And so they have been used. That's Tumbling Leaves. This one is called Card Tricks. We used to swipe Mom's quilts out of her cupboard and take them and enter them in competitions because Mom would never do that for herself. And she won numerous and numerous blue ribbons from fairs and from the Stonewall Jackson Jubilee. We'd take her up there, take her quilts up there, they would be jury. The last 2 years of her life, probably the 2 years before she passed away, she had 2 quilts that were juried and hung in the lobby at Ruby Memorial Hospital. If you've ever been in the lobby, and the big high ceiling in the lobby, and they'd have quilts hanging down from the ceiling. 2 of Mom's quilts hung from the ceiling there in the lobby of Ruby. This is a wall hanging Mom made. It's called Tyrillium, depicting the Tyrillium flowers that bloom in the wild in the woods. She made this one in 1986. And I'd encourage you, if you have a chance after the service, stop and look at the stitching. Mom wasn't just a blue ribbon quilter. I consider my mom a master quilter. She's one who spent an enormous amount of time at her craft. I was talking to Virginia Strong this week over the hospital, Ralph's mom. She told me Ralph started taking piano lessons when he was 8. I said, "Do you like to practice?" She said he loved to practice. She said every evening he'd sit down at the piano in the living room. So I'd sit in there with him and Ralph would practice and practice and practice. Ralph played the organ for the first time in church at the age of 15. It wasn't here. It was church across the river, I think your mom said. Disciples of Christ. He played the organ for the first time at the age of 15 in church. And as many of you know, Ralph's been playing the organ and piano here at Glendale for 40 years now. John Saffel went to work in Fostoria Glass in their design department at the age of 17, right out of high school. In fact, Fostoria came to the high school and were trying to recruit someone for their design department, and they hired John at the age of 17. Now, John didn't begin his career designing. He began making molds for the designs that other folks had made, but eventually John became a designer, and at the end of his 29 years with Fostoria, he was head of the design department. And I saw some of his work. It's beautiful. It was down at the house the other day. He showed me some of his work. It's just gorgeous. At the end of those 29 years, he decided he was going to do a little on his own. He went into sculpting, 3-dimensional rather than 2-dimensional. Did that for about 4 years, and then went to work for Fenton Glass for another 10 years, basically in the 3-dimensional design and all. So John had about 43 years altogether in designing and crafting glass and all of that. Some of you have seen these sculptures. We have this bust of Moses sitting over in the overflow room. He drive down by John's, you look up in the yard, and he's got a caveman or something about this tall carved down in the yard down there. Several busts of family members and all in his house. John didn't become a master designer overnight. He apprenticed under folks at Foss Story as he learned his craft and grew. And I thought for you golfers, since I was talking about some other folks, I have something for you golfers as well. I know there's several golfers in the congregation here, and there's an old story that I saw floating around the other day when I was researching some practice and things. And there's an old story about golf champion Ben Hogan. And after Hogan had won a major tournament, a reporter asked him, how is it that under pressure you're able to hit so many miraculous shots? And after reflecting a moment, Hogan replied, I guess I'm just lucky. But Mr. Hogan, the reporter, came back, you practice more than any golfer who ever did. Well, Hogan said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. For many of us, to be successful at a particular skill takes deliberate practice. Notice I didn't say just practice, but deliberate practice. And deliberate practice is an activity designed specifically to improve performance. And often you do deliberate practice with a teacher's help. It could be an art teacher, a music teacher, it could be whomever. But you more than likely do deliberate practice with a teacher's help. And the practice activity can be regularly repeated, and the practice activity provides regular feedback. And deliberate practice is highly demanding mentally, whether it's purely physical or mental practice that you're doing. It's highly demanding. I was watching the Olympics this past week, and they were talking to an American sprinter who had just won a medal. And he had changed his sprinting style in the 8 months leading up to the Olympics. And he would, when he would get into the blocks, for years he started off with one foot driving and the other foot leading. 8 months before he went to the Olympics, he switched feet. It's like eating and riding with your right hand all of your life, and suddenly you switch to your left hand and begin doing your riding and eating with your left hand. And he deliberately practiced this in the months leading up to the Olympics. And his reasoning was that we have a strong side of our body, and it's usually the side of your body that your dominant hand's on, and you have a weak side of your body. And that if he would start strengthening the weak side of his body, that when he ran, he would push off with equal pressure on both legs as he ran. That was his reasoning. Must have worked. He won a gold medal. You know, but it took deliberate practice on his part. And it can be demanding, really demanding, mentally or physically. And this factor separates deliberate practice from mindless practice. Also, deliberate practice isn't much fun. I can remember when I first started tying flies. And I'd get those little feathers, wee little bitty feathers, and I'd get that string up there with a thread, and I'd start winding it, the feathers would slide this way, and slide that way, and it'd fall out of my hand. And when I'd lash the fur on, rather than the tail of the fly being back, it would be all splayed out, because I hadn't learned to use the proper thread tensions. And it just wasn't much fun. I would just get aggravated, and then finally I would quit. In Ephesians, the Apostle Paul offers essentially the same thesis. If you're going to be a successful Christian, the potential for success is found in a community of faith, where teaching and practice of wise and faithful mentors nurtures people to maturity. I don't believe in this thing called Lone Ranger Christians. I don't believe that anyone is a Christian on their own. That it takes a community of faith and nurture that you grow and become mature in. I remember Sunday school teachers who nurtured me. I can remember Bible studies and prayer meetings, and all of these things that nurtured and helped to form who I am as a disciple of Jesus Christ. In the previous context to today's text, Paul reminds the Ephesians that they have been taught the truth that is in Jesus by himself and by others. Paul says, I've taught you about Jesus, and others have taught you the truth about Jesus. You know the truth about Jesus. And that truth results in putting away the pagan life that they had previously been taught. And instead they are being renewed in the spirit of their minds and to clothe themselves with the new self-created according to the likeness of God in true righteousness and true holiness. They were being renewed in their spirits and in their minds. And so, folks, the community of faith that we gather in other words, provides the patronage and the spiritual parentage that shapes the people into the likeness of God. And we can't be successful Christians on our own. It takes a community to make us so. And as Paul puts it in the 25th verse, chapter 4, the first verse that Bob read, he says, we are members of one another. We are members of one another, which means that we are interconnected as parts of the body of Christ. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. All the training and the nurturing in the world can't make us successful Christians if we don't practice what we've learned and embody what we've been taught. What we do with the abundance of the nurture that we receive is also a critical factor in success. Pure talent, background, and advantage are not enough to make someone successful. Nurture, education, and attention are only a framework upon which success might, and I say here again, might be built. I know there's a fair number of educators in this congregation, school teachers and whatever. And I want you to think back over the things that you've taught. You have had some children or youth or young adults in classes that you've taught who just had pure, raw ability. I mean, they just had pure, raw ability. And the world was the limit for them. They just wouldn't practice. They just wouldn't practice. They just wouldn't apply themselves. What makes the difference between potential and success is practice. And Gladwell says in his book, his hypothesis is that it takes at least 10,000 hours of practice to be successful at something. It took Mozart 20 years of composing to produce his greatest works. It took Bobby Fischer 10 years to become a chess grandmaster. Bill Gates programmed computers virtually non-stop for 7 consecutive years as a high school and college student. John Saffel designed for 43 years of his life. Ralph's played here at Glendale for the last 40 years of his life. What's it take to be truly great at something? About 10,000 hours. The disciples of Jesus followed him around for 3 years. And if you do the math, that comes to more than 10,000 hours of practical experience in discipleship. Paul urges the Corinthians to take what they've learned from him and others and start practicing it as well. And in this passage from Ephesians, Paul seems to be offering them a practice schedule of things that they should work on if they're going to be successful disciples themselves. And first, Paul says this: disciples telling the truth to one another. Truth-telling is a glue that holds a community together and enables people to deal honestly and forthrightly with each other. Falsehood or lying, folks, on the other hand, creates a constant cloud of suspicion and secrecy. Practice telling the truth in love, says Paul. And after 10,000 hours of doing it, you'll have a healthy community. Coupled with truth-telling is a practice of dealing honestly with your anger. Secrets, lies, and rumors lead to false assumptions. Anger is often a byproduct of a failure to deal openly and honestly in the community, and makes room for the devil to exploit the lies we believe about others and ourselves. Practicing the principle of dealing with your anger quickly and thoughtfully before the sun goes down leads to a greater sense of self-control, enables forgiveness of others and the self, and it leads to restoration of the community. Besides that, when you're angry with someone and you stay angry with someone, all you're doing is giving that someone control over you. And I don't like that, so I'm quick to forgive most of the time. Oh, I've held a grudge or two. Have you? Oh, yeah, I've held a grudge or two. I try not to do it. Because in doing it, I'm just miserable, and I make everyone around me miserable, when I allow that person to have control over me. And I don't want that person to have control over me. Work for 10,000 hours on controlling your anger, and you'll be a different person altogether. I guarantee you. Work is the thing that most people practice on a daily basis. I look out there, I see a number of retirees out here now. You know, I'm getting to know some of you folks. A number of you are retirees, but some of you are still working. And work is the thing that most Dave Bauer back here, he doesn't work. He practices golf 4 days a week, okay? He would practice golf 5 days a week, but that one day down at the golf course, which one is it? Is Ladies' Day.
Wednesday.
Wednesday is Ladies' Day. So Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday he practices golf. But some folks have to work. Some folks have to work. And so if our approach to work shouldn't just be about earning a paycheck. You know, we may not be active thieves, but we can steal time from our employers and co-workers by doing less than our best. Paul urges the Ephesians to practice seeing their work as an opportunity for service to those in need. Don't be lazy, he says. Go out and get a job. Why? So you can earn some money and give to the poor and the needy. He sees their, and he urges the Ephesians to practice seeing their work as an opportunity for service to those in need. When we're practicing disciples, all of those work hours, no matter what we do, can be seen as a means toward the goal of advancing God's kingdom. And we need to practice our speech as well, Paul says. Loose and evil talk seems to be the norm in our culture. And it's very easy, even for Christians, to get caught up in it. Just witness for the example, the vitriol that pours out, it's being poured out during political campaigns by people who claim to follow Christ. But what would happen if instead we practice saying nothing but words that give grace to those who hear? I call them words of life and not of death. Words of light and not words of darkness. You see, successful disciples engage in the daily practice of disciplining their speech to reflect the building up of others rather than tearing them down. Practice that for 10,000 hours, which equals roughly 416 days, and you'll sound like a generous genius. Next, Paul warns about grieving the Holy Spirit, which seems to be another way of saying we violate our baptism and our role of building up the community in holiness. Spirit on us, then we need to be reminded that our conduct and thought life should reflect the Spirit's presence in our lives. We can merely settle for the privilege of grace we can receive in baptism, or we can practice it and demonstrate it every day. We can say, oh, I'm baptized, I've received the grace of God, and then just be the most ungraceful people we ever met. Or we can receive that grace, that mark of the Spirit on us, and then begin to practice it and demonstrate it in our lives every day. In verses 31 and 32, where Bob read, Paul sums up the argument by saying that if we are really practicing Christians, then things like bitterness, wrath, anger, arguments, slander, and malice will eventually be put away, and it will be replaced with kindness, tenderheartedness, and forgiveness. And that will only happen, my friends, through the discipline of practice. There was a time in my life when I took the Lord's name in vain. And it just, all I had to do was open my mouth and it happened. I haven't done it for years. But it took discipline. And it took practice. And when I quit doing it, people began to notice. When people began to notice, then it gave me an opportunity to be a witness. The true gauge of success for Christians, according to Paul, is that their character mirrors God in the way that a child mirrors a parent. The ultimate example of that kind of success is Jesus. Remember, Jesus told his disciples, when you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Right? When you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Jesus spent 30 years or so practicing on his own before he launched his public ministry, which is far more than 10,000 hours. Yes, he had the privilege of being God's own son, and he was born with a divine nature. But I would suggest to you that even the Son of God knew that the success of his earthly ministry depended on years of practice. And if you and I, if we're going to successfully follow Jesus, we're going to have to invest in two things. Living in a community of faith. My friends, you can't do it on your own. You can't do it on your own. You have to have a community of faith to live in. And the second thing is taking time to practice. It's not the Cinderella story that we are concerned about, you see, but the story of Christ at work in us. Thousands of hours of stitching. 43 years of designing. 40 years of playing the piano and the organ here at Glendale. A lifetime of prayer, Bible study, and Christian fellowship. A life lived in the community of faith. And we are, as John Wesley says, going on to perfection. We never may be entirely perfect. You see, practice doesn't always make perfect. It just makes better. Better today than I was yesterday. Hopefully, because of practice, I'll be better tomorrow than I am today. We may never be entirely perfect in this life. But in the life to come, we'll know perfection. So here, practice, practice, practice. No matter what the distractions may be, whether they come from co-workers or families, or the lady or the gentleman in front of you or behind you in the line at Walmart, direction.